Ready to flex those brain muscles. Today's deep dive. Medieval theories of analogy. We're talking about how thinkers way back when, how they figured out like what words mean, especially when you're dealing with huge, mind-blowing concepts.
You might be thinking medieval philosophers. What's that got to do with me? But trust me, the way they tackled language, still super relevant today, especially when we try to wrap our heads around, well, anything complex.
Right, we got some heavy hitters as our guide today. Excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, talking about medieval theories of analogy. So Aquinas, Duns Scotus, they were like the philosophical rock stars of their time.
And they were wrestling with some seriously fundamental stuff, like how do words connect to the actual things they represent? How can one word, like, refer to a specific thing and a general concept at the same time?
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of analogy, let's set the stage. How did these medieval thinkers even view language in the first place?
They saw it as, well, sort of a triangle. You've got the actual spoken word, right? Then the concept you form in your mind. And then the real world thing out there that it refers to.
So if I say castle, the sound castle, that's just something we all agreed on. But the concept of a castle, the picture that pops into my head, that feels way more universal.
Exactly. And that's where signification comes in. Words don't just have meaning, they actually make known something beyond themselves. They point to both the concept and to the real world castle out there.
Okay, but then there's this whole thing about common natures. How does castle refer to both Windsor Castle specifically and to the general concept of castleness?
That was a big one for them. They believed in these common natures, basically a shared essence, something all things of a certain type possess. Every individual castle shares in that common nature of castle.
Interesting. So castle signifies the specific building and this abstract castle quality.
You got it. And don't forget, they saw the world in these distinct levels of reality. You had substances like an individual castle, and then accidents, the properties or qualities of that substance.
So a castle's size, the materials it's made of, those will be accidents, specific to that one castle.
Exactly. And this hierarchy of reality, it's going to become crucial when they start tackling the big, complicated problem that led them to develop theories of analogy.
Because simply defining things wasn't cutting it anymore. You mentioned 3 areas where they needed something more powerful: logic, theology, and metaphysics.
Exactly. Logicians were running into trouble with words that have, multiple meanings, like bank can refer to a financial institution or the edge of a river. How do you tell which one is meant?
Yeah, context helps, but even then it can get confusing.
And then you have theology, where the stakes are even higher. How do you even begin to talk about God, a being that's supposed to be completely beyond our human comprehender?
If you describe God as good, are you using good in the same way you describe a good deed?
That's the dilemma. If you are, doesn't that kind of box God's goodness into our limited human understanding? But if you're not, are you even talking about God at all?
It's a tough balancing act, and I'm guessing metaphysics throws in its own set of challenges.
Absolutely. Metaphysics deals with, like, the very nature of reality itself. How do different levels of reality connect? God and creation, for example, or substances and their accidents.
So analogy became their way of navigating these tricky relationships, talking about connections without, oversimplifying things.
Exactly. It acknowledged that there are similarities and crucial differences between these different levels of reality.
Analogy, huh? Sounds like their way out of that whole philosophical mess. So not one single meaning, not totally different meanings either. It's like they went with related meanings, a way to handle all those shades of gray that language throws at us.
Yeah, exactly. Analogy let them bridge those gaps, like between different levels of reality, between the finite and the infinite. It's a way of saying, look, these two things, they're not identical, but they're not totally unrelated either.
Makes sense. But how did they actually use analogy? Did they, have different types or something?
Oh, for sure. They came up with 3 main types: analogy of proportionality, analogy of attribution, and analogy of imitation.
Proportionality, attribution, imitation. All right, let's break those down. Starting with proportionality, what's the deal with that one?
Proportionality is all about comparisons. Think of it like this. You could say a point is to a line, kind of like a spring is to a river, see? You're pointing out a similar relationship between 2 sets of things, even if those things themselves are completely different.
It's less about the actual things themselves and more about the pattern they share, the ratio. Like a king is to his kingdom as a captain is to their ship.
Exactly. It's all about finding that shared structure, that dynamic, across different situations.
Okay, I think I'm following. So what about analogy of attribution? That one sounds, all right, maybe extra relevant to our philosophical deep dive here.
Attribution. Yeah, this one's all about a primary source. And then something else that's connected to it that gets its meaning from it. Think of the word healthy. A dog can be healthy, right? But its food can also be healthy.
But the food isn't healthy in the same way the dog is healthy, right?
Exactly. The food's healthiness, it comes from its effect on the dog. It's a secondary meaning derived from that relationship.
A chain of meaning almost. The food, it inherits its healthiness from like contributing to the dog's well-being.
You got it. And this type of analogy, it was huge in medieval thought, especially when they were talking about God and creation.
Yeah, I could see how that would work. God is good. So creation is good because it reflects, it participates in that goodness.
Right. And that brings us to analogy of imitation, the idea that something is called good, or just because it's imitating God's goodness, God's justice.
Like a, I don't know, a pale reflection of the ultimate source.
Exactly. It emphasizes how creation depends on God for all of its good qualities. But even the word analogy itself, right? Even that can get tricky. Didn't it mean different things back then?
Yeah, that's true. Did they always use it in this like super precise philosophical sense?
Not always. No, it evolved over time. In the 13th century, that's when it really solidified into this idea of, related but distinct meanings. Before that, it had all sorts of uses, like in interpreting scripture, in giving speeches.
So context is key, as always. But it sounds like analogy of attribution, that was their real workhorse, especially when it came to those really tough philosophical questions. Why was that?
Yeah, you're right. It was their go-to tool. It let them talk about God and creation without, erasing the differences between them. It's a way of saying, yes, there are similarities, but the source matters.
Can you, I don't know, give us a concrete example? Like, how would they use this analogy of attribution to actually explain something specific?
Sure, let's stick with healthy. So the dog is healthy primarily, right? It's food, even its urine, we can call those healthy, but in a secondary sense.
Because the food, it contributes to the dog's health. And the urine, well, it can be a sign of that health.
Exactly. It's all about tracing that meaning back to the primary source. And they applied this to tons of concepts, goodness, wisdom, even existence itself.
So a person, you could say a person is wise because they're participating in God's wisdom, God being the, like, ultimate source of wisdom.
Precisely. It allows them to make meaningful statements about God without reducing everything down to the same level. But not everyone was on board with this whole analogy thing, right? Didn't some people push back?
That's what I was wondering. Was there any, I don't know, any resistance?
Oh, tons. Lots of different interpretations, different approaches. And one of the big names to challenge that status quo was Thomas Aquinas.
Aquinas, the philosophical heavyweight himself. Okay, I'm all ears. What did he bring to the table?
Aquinas, he loved to synthesize ideas, and he really clarified a lot about analogy. He argued that God is the ultimate source of everything. Existence, goodness, the whole shebang. Creatures just they participate in those perfections.
It's like God is the sun, and we're just the planets reflecting its light.
Perfect analogy. Aquinas, he also connected causality and similarity. Whatever causes something, it produces something that's like itself.
Okay, so a good tree produces good fruit. A wise teacher imparts wisdom. Yeah, that makes sense.
And for Aquinas, this applied to God as well. God as the ultimate cause, he creates things that they reflect his perfections, but in a limited, finite way.
We can talk about God even if we can't fully grasp him because we see like glimpses of his qualities in creation.
Exactly. But Aquinas, he was careful. We can't just, project our limited human understanding onto God.
So when we say God is good, we don't mean good in the exact same way as when we say like that person is good, right?
Exactly. It's good used analogically. Acknowledging that God's goodness, it's on a whole other level.
This is getting pretty nuanced. Did Aquinas face any criticism for his views?
Oh, tons. So many debates, especially about God. Some people argued over whether, like, analogy of attribution or analogy of proportionality, which one was better for describing God.
So some were focused on the relationship between God and his perfections, while others emphasized like the proportional similarities between God's attributes and our own.
Right, and these debates, they went on for centuries, with different interpretations, different refinements.
Sounds like every answer just led to more questions.
Yeah, it did. And that brings us to another key figure, John Duns Scotus. Now, Scotus, he was a bit of a rebel when it came to these traditional theories of analogy.
Ooh, a philosophical rebel. Okay, I like him already. What made Scotus so radical?
All right, get ready for this because this one's a mind bender. Scotus argued that being, yeah, that most basic concept of all, he argued that being is actually a univocal term.
Hold on, wait. You mean being has the same meaning whether we're talking about God or creatures?
You got it. That was his radical claim. He said being passes the contradiction test. It can't be both true and false for the same thing.
But how can that be? God is like infinite and eternal. Creatures are finite and temporary. How did he square that circle?
That's the million-dollar question. Skatus said, he said that while God and creatures, they're distinct in their modes of being, they still share the same fundamental act of existing.
So it's like saying, I don't know, a candle flame and a bonfire, they're both fire, even though they're different sizes, different intensities.
Great analogy. And this idea of being as univocal, oh, it had huge implications for how he approached all sorts of philosophical problems.
It must have like shaken things up quite a bit.
Oh, it did, and it led to even more debates, this time about the nature of concepts themselves.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Concepts are getting their own spotlight now. What were they debating about?
Remember how we talked about words, concepts, and things? Well, Scotus, he brought the focus onto the concepts themselves. Like what's actually happening in our minds when we form those concepts.
So not just how words signify things, but the mental process behind it all.
Exactly. Scotus and his followers, they made this distinction between the act of thinking, they called it the formal concept, and the thing that's actually being thought about, the content of that thought, the objective concept.
Okay, so the formal concept, that's like the meta action. And the objective concept, that's the content, the stuff of the thought.
You got it. And this distinction, it became crucial for understanding being.
So if the word being points to one formal concept in our minds, what about the objective concept, the actual being that we're thinking about?
That's where things get even trickier. Is there just one objective concept of being, or are there many? Each one matching the different ways things exist.
Oh, my head is spinning. We've gone from words to diving into the structure of thought itself.
We have, and these debates about concepts, about the univocity of being, they had a huge impact on later medieval philosophy.
This feels like we're standing on the edge of a philosophical cliffhanger. Where do we go from here? So we're left with this like philosophical tug of war. Is being this like big unified concept? Or are we talking multiple concepts of being, depending on what we're actually talking about? It's a real showdown.
It was a major sticking point, and right into this heated debate, right to the thick of it, walks Cardinal Cajetan, a late medieval scholar who really tried to bring some order to all this chaos.
Cajetan, huh? The master organizer. What was his take?
He was a big Aquinas fan, tried to build on Aquinas's work with analogy, and Cajetan he created a whole classification system to try and clarify how analogy works in different situations.
Okay, lay it on me. Hit me with those philosophical categories.
His whole system hinges on the relationship between the concept and the existence of the things you're comparing.
Concept and existence. Yeah, those are big ones. How did he weave those into his system?
Okay, so his first type of analogy is analogy according to concept but not existence. So different concepts for different things. But they all point back to one main concept.
Okay, I need an example. Abstract concepts they're slippery.
All right, think about the word good. We talk about a good person, right? A good meal, a good book.
But those are all different kinds of good, right? Like a good book isn't good in the same way that a person is good.
Exactly, different concepts, but they're all connected to this primary notion of goodness.
Okay, I see. So what about the second type of analogy in Kazetan's system?
Second type, analogy according to existence but not concept. So one concept that applies to different things. But those things exist in totally different ways.
So it's like using the same mold but different materials.
Perfect analogy, like the word body. We can talk about a human body and a celestial body.
They're both bodies, but one is flesh and blood, the other is stars and planets. Totally different ways of existing.
Precisely. Same concept, but different modes of being.
Right. Two down, one to go. What's that final category?
Final category, analogy according to both concept and existence. Different concepts, different ways of existing, but there's still a proportional similarity between those things.
This is getting pretty complex. You got an example. You got an example to illustrate that one.
Yeah, think about God and creation. They have different concepts, right? And they exist in vastly different ways, but there's still a proportional similarity between their attributes.
So God's wisdom is to God like human wisdom is to a human. That kind of comparison.
He got it. And Cajetan, he argued that this analogy of proper proportionality, that this is the only true analogy. The others are they're analogous in a looser sense.
So he was really drawing a line in the sand. True analogy needs similarity in both concept and existence.
Exactly. And he believed that this type of analogy was crucial, absolutely crucial for talking about God in a way that actually makes sense.
But I bet even Cajetan's system wasn't immune to debate, right? Philosophers, I mean, they love to argue.
Oh, absolutely. His interpretation of Aquinas, it caused a whole other wave of arguments. Some people agree with him. Others thought he was way off base.
It seems like every attempt to really nail down analogy, it just makes it slip away more and sparks more discussion. It's like trying to catch smoke.
That's a great way to put it. Analogy is inherently skippery, but that's part of what makes it so fascinating. It forces us to confront the limits of language and just how complex reality truly is.
Wow, what a journey. We started with basic words, and we ended up talking about the nature of God, the nature of existence. And it all comes down to this slippery notion of analogy.
Exactly. And even though these debates happened, centuries ago, they still matter. They still matter today. How do we use language? How do we use language to talk about the unknown? How do we even begin to understand our place in this vast universe? These are questions that continue to challenge us.
Well, dear listener, we've reached the end of our medieval adventure. But hopefully sparked some new ideas, some new questions for you. What are your takeaways from this deep dive? What's still swirling around in your mind? We'd love to hear your thoughts.